Welcome, Cleo, to my channel. I know Cleo from Instagram. We just found out that we were ex-Jehovah's Witnesses a couple years ago, and then we just found each other again. And I have been on this interview streak. And unbeknownst to me, I was just going to be this person that loved interviewing ex-Jehovah's Witnesses. So here we are with my 22nd interview, Cleo. And I just reached out to her. I'm like, there's not a vibe like yours on my YouTube. I think you need to like bring some of that amazingness to my channel. So can you share your story? I mean, some people I reached out to have not wanted to share their story, and I know that you're in a good space, and I would love to share your story on my channel. So here you are. So without further ado, Cleo, why don't you take it from the top? Talk about your childhood and where you're from.
So I am originally from like northern Kentucky, Cincinnati, Ohio. I always tell people Cincinnati, Ohio, because nobody knows where northern Kentucky is. But so I grew up out in the sticks of Kentucky, was raised a witness. My parents, on my dad's side, his parents were witnesses, and on my mom's side, they were like kind of. But like honestly, I had a pretty good childhood. My family did a lot of like need greater work, so we traveled to different countries, and we actually spent a lot of time in Ecuador doing preaching work there. And I had a lot of friends growing up, so you know, when I look back on that part of my life, like I had a good childhood. Because you know, when I tell people like, oh, I don't talk to my family, they're like, oh, that must be been terrible. But I'm like, I genuinely had like a good time being raised as a Jehovah's Witness. And even now I'm like, I feel like there's some parts of being raised that way that like gave me some good morals. Not all of them were good morals, but some of them. But yeah, that's kind of like my childhood. And then I just want me to go straight into like how I got disfellowshipped, or
Actually, I'm curious, do you have any siblings?
oh yeah, I have an older brother. He's 5 years older than me, and he's still a witness, married,
Okay.
has a kid now, I think. So
How old were you when you got baptized?
I was 14.
Okay. So obviously when you were 14, you were going to say that you were dedicated. Was there ever a time where you were pioneering or anything like that?
Oh yeah. So when I got baptized at 14, I kind of felt like it was like I was like a late to do that. Like there was like so much pressure to get baptized when you're young. And I kind of even wanted to wait more than like being 14, but my mom was a pioneer. I think my dad was like an auxiliary pioneer. So I always had that like good example of my mom being a pioneer, and I was be out in service with her all the time. And that was one of my goals, was to pioneer too. So I was like, you know what, I'll just, I'll get baptized. Like I felt the pressure, and I was like, I need to do this. So yeah, I got baptized at 14, and then I regular pioneered for, I want to say 2 or 3 years.
Wow. So you were in high school and you were regular pioneering?
So I actually, my parents took me out of school when I was, I don't know how old I was. I would have been in 8th grade, and they started homeschooling me because that's when we started traveling the world and like doing need greater work. So I couldn't be in school, also like be preaching in third world countries. So they pulled me out, which was a cool experience. But I also think that like I did way better in school. And when I started homeschooling, like that was the least of my interests. Like I was like traveling the world and preaching. I was like, I don't need to worry about school. So yeah.
So after 8th grade, you were homeschooling, and your dad was he an elder?
My dad was not an elder, which like even now when I think back about it, I'm like surprised that he wasn't an elder. But he also started pioneering. My parents were both regular pioneering at a time, and my older brother. So like we were all regular pioneering together. So like I guess you could say like we were a spiritual family.
And what was your mom and dad doing to support you guys as you were traveling?
So my dad, I think it was like his own business, or he worked with this company forever. He was did like general construction for like really rich people, and like remodeled the house. And I did that with him. So like I did construction for 3 years with my dad, because my parents didn't want me working like with a bunch of worldly people. Like,
Yeah.
so like, why don't you work with your dad and a bunch of old men and do construction work? That seems like a safe option.
Oh, that's awesome. So you were doing that when you were still a teenager.
Yeah, I started doing that when I was like 18. I started doing construction work with my dad. But so yeah, honestly, like we traveled so much, and my mom didn't work because she was regular pioneering. So my dad, I guess, made enough money to support us. Like my parents never were open with money at all. I don't know if that's like a normal witness thing, but like I'm assuming my dad made a lot of money because we traveled a lot and he was the only one working. So yeah.
When you were talking about you traveled a lot, so talk about the places that you went to from age 14 to 18. What places in those 4 years did you go to?
Yeah. So my first trip that we took, I think I was around 15. We got an opportunity to go to Panama, and up in Volcan, Panama, I think was the name of the town. We did that for 5 weeks just for preaching work there. And I remember like that was my first international trip. And I was like, I do not want to do this. Like, I don't want to leave my home for 5 weeks. I don't want to leave my friends for 5 weeks. Like, third world country, that seems so terrifying. So we went with a group of, I think like 8 of us. There were some other people from our hall that went, and we all lived in this like tiny little home up in the mountains in Panama. And that was a time. But like after that trip, I was hooked, like getting to see just a different way that people lived. And like, I think that traveling is the best education that you can get. So like, I am very grateful that my parents took me out of school and we started traveling. Like that was a better experience than high school ever could have been for me. So Panama was the first. And then I believe the next like mission trip we went to Ecuador. So the first time we went to Ecuador, we spent 3 months there up in Cuenca, Ecuador, which like holds a very special place in my heart. I love that little city. And we were with the congregation there, did preaching work. Like we would go and not like, we had a presentation in Spanish that we would go and like ask if people spoke English. I think I can probably still butcher it. It was like, estamos buscando personas que hablan inglés. Alguien en su casa que hablan inglés. Like, I'm sure if anybody that speaks Spanish is like, that sounded horrible, but that's what I would say to like all the people in Ecuador. And then we would like try to find people who speak English and give them our literature. So we did that for 3 years in a row. So 3 years in a row, we would go to Ecuador in the winters and live there. So I spent a total of 9 months in Ecuador. I really grew to love the people, the culture, the food, everything about Ecuador. And then after that, like there was a point in time where I would be going to like 3 different countries a year. Because we also would do the international conventions. I think the first one we went to was in Germany. So we did the international convention in Germany, which was cool because like my family is German, so that was fun. And then we went to like France and Switzerland and the UK when we were over there. And then after that, I kind of like started to do a little of traveling on my own and like with some other witness friends, and just I went to more parts in Europe, and then we went to Thailand, which is kind of like leads into the story of how I got disfellowship. So I don't know if you want me to like get into that, or you have any more questions on like before I got disfellowship. We can say
Yeah, let's dive in. So at this point, how old were you when you went to Thailand?
I was 19. And then like a little bit of backstory. So like before we went on that trip, I had like that past summer, I think I got in trouble for like underage drinking, and I got reproved and I got removed as a pioneer, which was like a really big thing. Like, you know how they announced that like Cleo was no longer a pioneer, and I was just like, that really took a toll on me. And then I think I got in trouble again for like kissing a boy or something. So I was kind of like not on the best terms with the elders in my congregation already. And then so before we went to Thailand, I was doing construction with my dad. I ended up meeting this guy who was like a painter on one of the jobs, and we like secretly dated for a while, and like he was very respectful of everything. You know, I told him, I was like, I'm a Jehovah's Witness, I can't do anything. Like he was super great. But obviously you're not allowed to date anybody who's not a witness. So didn't tell my parents about anything. So this point we're like talking for 9 months. I go to Thailand with my family. I think it was, I don't know if we went for anything like for like preaching work. I think we just went to Indonesia and Thailand just to go. So this was literally like our second to last day in Thailand. We went snorkeling. I jump off this boat. I end up like cutting my wrist open on like something on the boat. I go to the hospital, and my friend's like going through my phone, trying to find pictures of my passport to send to my parents. And she comes up on all these pictures of the guy I was seeing who had a beard and was obviously not a witness. Turns out that once we got home, she called the elders of my congregation and told them that I was dating this guy who wasn't a witness. And it was this whole thing. And so when we got back home from Thailand, I had to tell my parents like, hey, I'm dating a worldly guy. And it was just this, like this whole thing. So when I got home, I had to talk to the elders. And like I said, I was already not on great terms with them. And at that point, like we had not done anything, you know, like to be worthy of being disfellowshipped. But like, I kind of like had this feeling that I was going to get disfellowshipped. I kind of always kind of had this weird intuition that I was, you know, going to get disfellowshipped. But I don't think I understood that when I was feeling that, because it's like, I didn't understand my own intuition, my own inner knowing back then. But I was always like, I don't know what it'd be like to get disfellowshipped. Like I always thought about it, you know, and like whenever I would see other people that were disfellowshipped, like you would pass them in the supermarket, and like I would always make eye contact with them and just like smile, because I'm like, I just don't think that's right that we just like act like they're not a person and ignore them. And like I don't know why. I just, you know, I could sense that was coming. So yeah, I ended up getting disfellowshipped. And then I ended up ending things with the guy because he's like, I don't want to take you away from your family. Like,
can I ask what made them disfellowship you if you guys haven't had sex or had anything like that?
So
what did the elders say to you?
I had a couple meetings with them. And like I told him I was dating this guy, and I can't remember the timing of it, but like I pretty much already knew I was getting disfellowship. So I literally like went over to this guy's house and was like, hey, you know, I'm going to get in trouble. So like, I don't want to get in trouble for nothing. So we ended up having sex, because I was like, fuck it. Like, if this is going to happen, like, I'm going to make it worth it. So I ended up losing my virginity. And then
I love it.
I ended up telling the elders like, yeah, you know, and it's just like, even when I think back about that, like the whole process of like being in a room with like 4 older men and they're asking you like detailed questions about your sexual experience, I'm just like, ugh, you know, it just gives me weird feelings now to think about that. But yeah, and I just remember them like asking me all these questions, and then I had to like go out of the room for them to make a decision with God. And like I was just like, I remember just so vividly sitting out in the hallway on a bench in the Kingdom Hall, just being like, this is it. And at that time, like I was still so in the zone with like the religion. Like I was like, this is the truth. I want to, you know, if I get disfellowshipped, I'm going to work so hard on coming back. And that was just a really hard time. And I remember them calling me back into the room, and they were like, Cleo, we're going to disfellowship you. And of course I'm a crybaby. So I was probably just like bawling my eyes out. And like the moment that they told me that, like the first thought that went through my head was like, oh shit, like other people are gonna find out about this. Like I'm gonna have to tell my friends, I'm gonna have to tell my brother, like I'm gonna have to call my grandma. That was the hardest part for me, I think, was like owning up to like the people that you love that were still in the religion, like, hey, I did something wrong and I'm gonna be disfellowshipped. Like that was almost the worst part. So yeah, they decided that, and then I had to go home and tell my parents like I'm going to be disfellowshipped.
So both of your parents were witnesses as well. So your parents were second generation.
My dad's side, they were Jehovah's Witnesses, and then my mom's side, my grandma on that side was like kind of, they were like in and out, not really like active, I guess you would say. I'm like forgetting the terminology. They were active witnesses.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so you had to, but you didn't have to call them. Your parents could have called them.
Yeah, but I'm pretty sure my mom was like, you need to call your grandma and tell her.
Okay.
Or, do you want her to find out from other people? And I was like, okay, I'll call her.
So you felt obligated to call them at that point, and because you knew you were going to get disfellowship.
Yeah,
and you were 18.
I was 19, I think. 19. Yeah.
Okay.
And then I even like some of my friends that I grew up with in congregation, like I remember sending them like a text and being like, hey, I'm getting to get disfellowshipped. Like they're gonna announce that I'm getting disfellowshipped like next week. So I remember like the last night we all hung out, like they were like, well, let's hang out one more time. So my like 3 of my friends came and picked me up, and we just like went and got food and like hung out. And yeah, it was just like, I just remember saying goodbye to them in the parking lot and being like, I'll be back. I remember just telling all my friends like that I told, like, I'll be back. Like, give me 6 months. I'll be back. Like that was the plan for me to get reinstated and just go back onto my little happy JW life. Like that was the plan.
I was there, right there with you. I'm like, of course I'm gonna get reinstated. It was my entire life, just like it was yours. It's like if people,
it's all you know.
Yeah, exactly. When you tell people this that are quote unquote worldly, they're like, why in the world would you go back to a cult? I feel like you don't understand. It was my whole life. And I also tell people, when you're in it, you feel like you're part of this huge family. It feels so real and so full of love. And then when you're out of it, you're like, that was so fake.
You're like, what the fuck was I smoking? Like,
right. How did I believe any of that? How did I believe that was love? Like, what the fuck? Yeah, exactly. So, okay, so last dinner with your friends, which is so funny. Were you guys crying?
Last supper, if you will.
Were you guys crying?
Oh, I was a basket case. Like I mean, I will probably end up crying in this interview. Like I cry all the time. Yeah, it was very traumatic. I was just like, I think that's when it like started hitting me. I'm like, I'm losing everything. At 19, I'm literally losing everything. I like all my communication, all my friends, everything. Yeah, it was like a lot of emotions going on then. But then so like next week came around. The hardest part too was so at that point my brother was married and like obviously lived with his wife. So he was in the household. So I wasn't going to be able to talk to my brother because he didn't live with us anymore, right? Like I was gonna be able to talk with my parents because I still lived with them. Like that's the rules for anybody who's not familiar, which is silly. So I had to go and tell my brother that I was going to get disfellowshipped. And I remember him saying to me, he's like, if you ever stop coming to meetings, like I'm going to hunt you down and I'm going to like make sure that you come back. Like I don't want to lose you as my sister, you know, like it was like a loving gesture, I guess. And that's always kind of stuck with me because still to this day, like my brother has zero communication with me. And I've had so many weird interactions with my brother, like after I was disfellowshipped and like weird stuff. Like I was still on the family phone plan and like I had to meet my brother at the, you know, phone store to like switch. And like, even just seeing him there, he was just like didn't look at me. Like I was not a person anymore. Like the strangest thing, like the way that my brother handles a situation, I'm like, what? It doesn't make any sense at all. Yeah. So then the meeting comes around where they're going to announce that I'm no longer Jehovah's Witness. And it's like, that was, you walk in and sit down and you wait for the announcements. I'm just like sitting there like, and then they announce like Cleo is no longer Jehovah's Witness. And it's just like, from that point on, it's like everyone I knew for my entire life, and like till that point in that congregation, like I was like, they all know that I did something wrong. And it's like, and thinking about it now, it's like that's another tactic for them, like manipulation tactic of like you know? And so I just remember like, I had a few people like look back at me and like smile. And then I remember, see, I'm getting like emotional. Told you I was gonna cry. I remember like one of the elders that I was like really close with, like, oh, sorry, I haven't talked about this in like a long time. He like came back and he like gave me a hug and he's like, well, you'll come back, like we'll see you again. Like an elder that I was close with. And I was just like, I'll be back, I'll be back. Like that was always what I told people. Oh, didn't think I was gonna cry this early on.
It's still, I mean, even when we work through things still have emotion to us, and it's harder to know that these people are still alive, that we're grieving people that are still alive and able to speak to us, than us grieving people that have died, because at least then we know that we can't contact them. Whereas now you can call that brother, but he's going to ignore you, which is way more painful than having to realize like, oh, he passed away and I'm just going to have to grieve him. Like he's still fucking alive. And that's what people don't understand who are never Jehovah's Witnesses, that it's such like still really raw emotion that we're holding on to. So totally identify with how you're feeling right now. So he said that to you as, would you say, when you got disfellowshipped at the meeting?
Yeah, at the meeting that I got disfellowshipped, I think like I probably went to the bathroom or something and he was like back there and like gave me a hug. And I think that meant more because it's like once you get disfellowshipped, people are like, you're not a person anymore. Like people don't even look at you like it's so strange. And to get reinstated, for people who aren't familiar with like the rules and stuff, to get reinstated, you have to show up to every meeting, like prove that you're like underlining your watchtower and like studying. And so it's like, it's kind of humiliating. Like you have to walk in twice a week. You have these meetings, you have to walk in and sit down and act like you're like, okay, everything's fine. I'm here to learn about Jehovah God and show that I'm trying. But it's like you walk in and no one looks at you, no one talks to you. You walk in, you sit down, and then you go through all the motions. And then as soon as the meeting's over, I would just like leave. And it's, yeah, the strangest thing now that I think about.
So you did that for several months. And then
So
what
yes,
happened?
So my parents told me like I can still live with them as long as the goal is to come back and get reinstated. So I think it was around, I was going through the motions for like a couple months, and I started to like, I honestly think it was pretty quickly. Like in the first month, I went through like feeling so angry and just like, why is this happening? This is so unfair. Like, why would a loving God put somebody through this? Like, why would he take everything away? You know, like your whole support system. And just like, so I went through the feelings of like anger and shame and guilt. And I was like, why did I do that? Like it wasn't worth it, and all these things. And I don't remember like exactly when, but I downloaded Tinder probably like a couple months in, and I was like, I'm so bored, I need to make friends at least.
So you weren't dating this guy anymore. At what point did you guys break up, that you guys, because you guys dated for 9 months and then you ended up having sex with them, getting disfellowshipped, and then at what did you say, you know what, this is not working?
I think we probably hung out for maybe like a couple weeks, and because at this point like I was totally in love with him, you know, like and I also too appreciate, like I think he just like opened up my eyes to certain stuff. Like I would explain certain beliefs of the witnesses and he would just be like, okay, have you ever thought about that differently? Like what if, like he was like the first person to be like, have you ever thought about like if that wasn't the truth? And I was like, no. It's like, what do you mean? That's always the truth. But so he kind of like, I almost feel like he started like my awakening process of like realizing it's not the truth. But yeah, I think we ended things maybe like a month or so, because he's like, he knew that I wanted to be reinstated and go back. And he's like, I can't take you away from your family. Like, so we ended things. And then, you know, once you start having sex, you don't really want to stop having sex. So I was like, oh, what's dating apps? You know, what's that like? So I downloaded Tinder. Whew. I don't know if this was a good decision or a bad decision, but I ended up, oh,
You're fine. So then you guys broke up.
Yeah, so we ended things, downloaded Tinder, started exploring the wonderful world of that. And I ended up meeting this guy who just introduced me to pretty much what I consider my family now, like all of my best friends that I have back in Cincinnati. We dated for a while. That was a whole shit show. But so this was probably 6 months into me being disfellowshipped. I was kind of like dating this guy, hanging out with him. And I think my parents kind of started to figure out like, she's gone a lot. And like, she doesn't have any friends. Like who's she hanging out with, you know?
And at this point, you weren't going to the meetings anymore?
I was still going to the meetings. I was still living with my parents, going to the meetings.
And dating guys on Tinder.
Yeah. I was really doing the double life thing pretty well.
Nice.
But like in my heart, I still was like, I still want to go back. I just felt like it. I remember I got to this point where like, I felt like the times where I was with the worldly people and like experiencing these things, I'm like, I feel like I'm in a movie. Like this does not feel real. I remember that feeling so vividly of like, this feels so strange, and like having an outer body experience, just doing what normal people do, like going to like house parties and smoking weed for the first time and like just being around all these people. I'm like, this is so strange. And then I would like go back to my normal life back home at my parents' house and like going to meetings. I'm just like, okay, like going through the motions. And it got fuzzy for a little bit where I was like, where like that switch started happening where I was like, now my life as like doing like the witness stuff felt strange and weird. And so my parents ended up finding out that I was like hanging out with these other people. And I actually, I ran into my mom while I was with this guy who I was dating, ran into her. She looked at me, did not say a word. And I was just like, fuck, fuck, they know now. So I was actually gone that weekend and I came home and I just knew it was gonna be bad. I was like, this is not gonna be good. Like my parents saw me with you, like they know that I'm not living correctly. So I came home to this letter on my bed. It was basically saying like, me and your father can no longer support your way of life anymore. We love you, but like you can no longer live with us. You have a week to get out. And I was just like, all right, here we go. So that was like a very
So you never, this was 6 months in, so you actually never wrote like a letter to get back into the religion?
No, yeah, this was 6 months of me being disfellowshipped that this happened.
Okay.
And also like in the time that I was like experiencing these things and like hanging out with worldly people, normal people, I did start to kind of wake up more and experience more things. And so I lived with the guy that I was seeing for like a week. I started like, I would go back to my parents' house when they weren't there and start packing up my things. And it was just like, coming home to that letter, I was like, I don't want to see my parents. Like, how barbaric is that for them to be like, write me a fucking letter of like, hey, get the fuck out of our house. And I was like, cool. So I ended up finding like the most perfect apartment, moved out. And it's just like, I remember packing up all my stuff and like getting the last load. And
at this point, were you working a construction job? Because I know that you said your dad got you into the construction world.
At this point, I was working construction with my dad, and I think I was also still working at Bath and Body Works. So.
Oh, really? So did you keep that? You kept both jobs?
I kept both jobs for the time being.
And did you see your dad still?
Yeah, so I would see my dad and my brother. So it was just it was very I think my dad kind of used that as an opportunity to like still talk to me. Like he kind of treated that very normally when I was at work, but my brother was like real weird about it. And then I quit that job shortly after I like moved out on my own. But I just remember like having the last load in my car and the driveway. My parents were just like standing in the driveway, and I was just like gave them a hug and I was like, love you guys. Like, and that was like the last communication I had with them for a while when I lived on my own. And like I would run into my mom at the coffee shop and she would just like look at me and not say anything. And like that happened a couple of times where I would just like run into my mom and it was just like I wasn't even there.
And your brother barely said anything to you. He was acting super weird. Is he still married?
I think so. I couldn't tell you.
Okay. And your dad, you saw him off and on the construction, but then at what point did you stop working construction?
I think I was like a couple months in, I ended up getting this job at a restaurant in downtown Cincinnati. So like once I had that secured, I quit. I'm pretty sure I quit my Bath and Body Works job and my construction job. Yeah, I quit. Oh, I was also cleaning houses at that time. I had like 4 jobs.
Just because you really wanted to keep yourself busy because you had all this new time on your hands because you didn't have to go to the meeting. So like, why the fuck not? Like making money is nice. So now you're multi-talented in all these different jobs and you have new friends and you have a new place that you're living in. What was going on in your head at this point where you're like, I'm definitely not going back to the meetings, or was there still part of you that's like, I still don't know? Because now you're 6 months out when you got your new place.
Yeah, it was like about 6-7 months. I remember I went to one meeting. Once I moved out, I was on my own. I went to one meeting and I remember like going to that meeting and leaving and I'm like, I don't want to do this anymore. Like I do not want to do this anymore. That was the last meeting I ever went to. I think I can't remember if I went to the memorial that year when I was living on my own. I don't think I did because I was kind of just like, no, I did. I went to the memorial and I brought the guy that I was seeing. I brought some dude with a beard to the memorial. So that was probably a good little gossip story for the witnesses to talk about. But I think, and then like after that, I was just like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't want to do this anymore. But yeah, that was that like first year that I was on my own. I think that was the hardest time for me, just because it was so much to unpack, and I don't think I like I didn't have the support system. You know, I had a couple friends who didn't understand what I was going through, and I don't think I got into the headspace where I am now like yet. Like I didn't start my like journey into like personal development yet. I don't think it was until like the next year I started discovering all of this stuff, and I was like, oh, and that all changed my life. But that first year, it was just really hard. I think, yeah, like you said, I was trying to keep myself busy. I literally had 4 jobs. At one point, I was like had a couple different serving jobs, bartending jobs. I was cleaning houses. Like I was just making sure I was busy every single day, and then I was like hanging out with my friends that I had, and just exploring and living life. Like it was a really good year, but also a really hard year, like emotionally, internally. But like I was also experiencing all these amazing things for the first time, and like first time feeling like free and liberated to do whatever the fuck I wanted to. And yeah.
And you were still living in Ohio at the time.
Yeah. So I was like living right across the river from Cincinnati, and I was like working downtown. And also too, like I'm so glad that I got that job, because at that point the only friends I really had were the ones that I met through the guy I was seeing at the time. And then once I got this job at a restaurant, I started making all like so many of my own friends, and just like I also started like experiencing like going out for the first time. And you know, you don't do that as a witness. You don't go out to bars and like hang out with people as a witness. So getting to experience all that. Yeah.
Oh, I'm so sorry. And then at what point did you actually decide that you wanted to move out to a different place?
Oh, so much happened since so the first time I came out west and like saw Seattle, I was about 15, 16. I went on like a little road trip with my best friend at the time and her aunt and uncle, and we just like started in California and went up the coast, and I just absolutely fell in love with Seattle. So I always knew that I wanted to move out west. Like even when I was still a witness, like that was a goal to like move out west. So Seattle was always the goal, but it's like living on my own. No one prepared me for rent and bills and being an adult and having zero support from anyone. So like when I say that first year was like the hardest year of my life, like it was hard. Like there was times where I would be like crying on my floor, not knowing how I'm going to pay for anything, having like a negative balance. So I'm just like, what am I doing? Like, what is my life? So like Seattle was always the goal, but I had like $5 to my name. I'm like, how the fuck am I gonna move out west? And like everyone's always like, Seattle's expensive. Like, how are you gonna do that? Like, but I always constantly said, like, I'm moving to Seattle. I will live in Seattle one day. Like, I literally told every single person I met in Cincinnati that I'm moving to Seattle. So throughout those, like, I think it was 4 years that I kind of lived in that apartment, that was just like, I feel like that apartment became like my safe space to just like evolve. And I like thinking back on that now, like I went through so many like rebirths and like just uncovering everything. And I started getting something that really changed my life was getting into personal development. And I know I told you this before. I read the book You Are a Badass by Jen Sincero, however you say her name. And that was like the first time that I was like, oh, okay, I'm in control of like my thoughts and how I react to things and how I feel. Like I don't have to just do what other people say. And because it's like growing up as a witness, like everything is laid out for you. Like this is the right way to do things. Like this is what you should think and this is what you should believe. And everything is control. So like reading that book, I was like, oh, I can do what I want and I can think what I want. And like, I'm capable of like going after things and creating my own life and creating my own reality. So I got into personal development, watched some TED Talks. Brene Brown's talk on shame really fucking changed my life. And I think that helped my healing process. And also I went to therapy, which God bless my fucking therapist. Like she is, love her. So I went to therapy for like around a year and she just really helped me work through stuff with my parents. And I think when I started going to therapy and like talking to somebody who wasn't a witness and explaining to them, like that's, I think the first time that I understood the gravity of my situation. And like, because everything's so normal. Getting disfellowshipped was normal. And like having my family not talk to me was normal. Losing everything I've ever known was normal. And like, I think talking to a therapist, and I just remember like sometimes when I would tell her stuff, like seeing her reaction, I was like, oh, okay, this is kind of like traumatic and a big deal like to go through. And even now when I talk about this to people, it still kind of hits me sometimes that I'm like, I went through some shit.
That's why religious trauma and the Jehovah's Witness shit is like real deep, especially if you get disfellowshipped and your family shuns you. That's like next level. Yeah, and for us, it's like, yeah, it's normal that happened to me.
Yeah. So I feel like I'm all over the place right now, but like I've gotten to the point now in like my healing process where like when I first got to fellowship and everything happened, I think I was in fight or flight mode for so long where I was just like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like I've always been a very like strong and independent person. So I'm always just like, I fucking got this. Like even when I first got to fellowship and I decided I wasn't going to go back, I was like, I kind of viewed it as an opportunity to have a second life and a second opportunity to like, I was like, you know what, this is happening to me, but like, I'm not going to play a victim. I'm not going to be like, woe is me. Like I'm going to make the best life I possibly can for myself because why the fuck not? Like if I'm not doing that, I get to do whatever I want now. And I just think I've always like held on to that conviction to just like be happy and make my own way. But like for so long, I think I was just like, I'm fine. Everything's fine. Like I got this, I'm strong. Like, and even when I would tell my story to people, they would be like, Cleo, you're the strongest person I know. Like, how do you handle all this? Like, you know, it's like, you hear people say that. And it's like, I think part of me was like, I couldn't have bad days or let people know I was having bad days. Like I'm strong. I got this. And I think I finally got to the point in like my healing process where I was able to start uncovering like the bigger emotions at hand and being like, you know what, I am a very strong human being and I've got this, but like you can be strong and also admit that things are hard. And I think that's like a really big lesson that I've been learning this past year, and like being like, yeah, I have really bad days sometimes where it's like I break down for no reason. I cry for 30 minutes and I'm like, oh, okay, like just like learning how to like be okay and like sit in those hard feelings is a big lesson that I learned too, is like instead of avoiding those things, like facing your trauma is so fucking hard. I think like going through things are hard, but then to uncover all your demons and face that is way harder. And I think some people don't really talk about that. Like it's like literally opening up wounds and being like, okay, let's go through this and try to understand. And like, you can't move on and heal unless you like just really fully sit there and like, okay, just taking it all in. Like, I'm feeling all these hard emotions and this sucks, but I'm doing it.
And that's why I think a lot of the ex-witnesses kind of stay in that stuck angry phase, because they don't want to work through it because it is difficult. And they don't want to work through it. So then they're just like really angry. And like you said, it's a very difficult thing to actually uncover the layers of not only the ex-Jehovah's Witness trauma work, but your own personal trauma that you had maybe as a child, maybe in school, whatever the situation looks like, whether it's sexual trauma, neglect, abuse, and just really like getting into that mess and feeling your emotions. And another thing, like in the Jehovah's Witness world, we weren't allowed to feel our emotions. Like, we were happy people. We were supposed to be happy all the time. So we weren't allowed to be angry or sad. So when you grow up, those emotions are actually really important. Even the negative, quote unquote, emotions are really important to allow us to be real people, because real people are not supposed to be happy all the time. That's just not, even really positive people are not happy all the time. That's just, it's not really a thing. And like you said earlier too, like, you're a strong person, but also know that I have bad days too. That doesn't mean every single day.
Froze for a second.
Oh, that I'm not sure if I'm still frozen.
Oh, there you are. You froze for a second.
I was just saying, I know you said that you're a strong person, and just because you're a strong person doesn't mean that every single day is rainbows and sunshine. You have bad days too, and it is a total normal human experience. So then at what point, so going back to your story, at what point did you move? Did you say, okay, enough's enough? How long were you in Ohio before you then moved to Seattle? So you got this fellowship, you lived on your own, you had all these jobs, you met all these different people through your boyfriend, and then you decided to meet new people through your work. And then how long were you in living in Ohio before then you moved to Seattle?
It was, I believe, 4 years. And I finally like got to the point where I had a little bit of money saved up, and the plan was to move April of 2020 to Seattle. I had everything planned out. And then of course, the world went into chaos. And I was like, okay, well, shit. So I stayed in Cincinnati for a little bit longer. And then we like started getting all those like, honestly, like I started getting unemployment because I was bartending at the time, and obviously like everybody lost their job. And I was getting all these unemployment checks, which was like way more than I was making as bartender. So I'm like, I'll just save all this money so I can like actually move once like, everything settles down. So I had all this money saved, and then little backtrack, broke up with that one guy, started dating another guy. And he ended up moving to Denver, Colorado before the pandemic hit. And we were like still in communication, and he ended up like convincing me to move to Denver instead of Seattle so we could be together. So I ended up moving to Denver in August of 2020. And then so like before I moved, I pretty much sold everything in my apartment, like sold sold it all and like packed what I could in my little Subaru hatchback. And I had like this box of like baby pictures and stuff that I was like, I'm not going to take this with me. Like, this is, so I texted my mom and I was like, hey, I'm moving. I have this box of things that I think you might want. If you don't want it, it's going to go in the trash. So she was like, yeah, that's really important to me. So my parents ended up coming over to my apartment, and they literally stayed in their car outside my apartment. But this is the first time that I have really seen them in 3 years. The last time I saw them, I was in the hospital. That's a whole other story. But so this was the first time I've seen them in a while, and I like brought the box down, and my mom was like, also this was like peak pandemic, so like they had their mask on, they were like staying their distance, and like I came down, I gave them the bin, and my mom's like, thank you for like, giving this to us, like it's really important to me. And they're like, where you heading? And I was like, you moving far away? And I was like, yeah, I'm moving to Colorado. And they're like, okay, well, text us when you get there safely. Like, we like to know that like you got there safely. And I was just like, love you guys. And I think I gave my dad a hug, or maybe not, because it was like they were worried about COVID or whatever. But then I was like, hey, love you guys. And they drove away. And that has been the last time that I've seen my parents in person. So that's 2 years ago. So then I moved to Denver, stayed there for about 3 months. Stuff didn't end up working out with the guy. And I was like, well, I'm halfway to Seattle, so peace out. Thanks for the little pit stop. So then I finally made it to Seattle. I moved here in October of 2020, so it'll be almost 2 years that I've lived here, and it's been even more just life-changing experiences. And I was just talking to my best friend that was visiting me this past weekend of how like you just grow so much as a person just by like changing your environment, and it like moving out here was kind of like starting over again, because like I literally knew 2 people in Washington, and like I moved into an empty apartment again with like no furniture, and I was like, this is feeling familiar. But yeah, it's I've always felt drawn to Seattle, and like I can't even give you like a definite like reason why I wanted to move out here. It's just like magic, and this is such a healing place for me, like with the nature and the mountains and the trees. And I think now looking back on it, like I think I moved here to like heal more and like evolve more into like my spiritual journey. And yeah, it's like I know this is where I'm meant to be.
I love that. And remind me, you're 27. You just said you just turned 27.
Yep.
Wow, that's a lot. What would you say to your 19-year-old self that had just gotten disfellowshipped?
Oh my gosh. I'd want to just like give her the biggest hug, and I've like never thought about this question, which is
there's this time where, I mean, not everyone that gets disfellowshipped wants to return to the religion, but you and I both wanted to get back into the religion. And I love the fact that you had this boyfriend that kind of questioned things, and he was like, you're like, oh, that's actually a possibility, like you can question things, because we knew that if we questioned something we would get in trouble, or we would just be told that you needed to study more, which didn't really make sense to us. Like, how do we know that the dinosaurs got killed during the storm, the flood? Like, you need to read more of the Bible, you need to read more of this book. It's like, how do you know any of these things? They just made up stories. And the reason why I'm asking you is because I feel like that specific question is because when you were 19 and you were disfellowshipped, still living at home, I mean, I can imagine that you still had a lot of your parents' influence on you at that time. And then you really weren't thinking for yourself. Like, you weren't like 30 years old, living out on your own with a boyfriend, and then you got disfellowshipped. Like you were still very much like a baby. you hadn't spread your wings yet. And I know that you said you traveled some with some friends, but now you're like so mature because you've done so many things. You've moved now twice and you're still very young. You're 27, you just turned 27 years old. So there's this like it's such a growth in just that time. And I feel like in these like 8 years of you leaving and creating your own space, like you probably grew more in 8 years and most women grow in like 30 years because
Yeah.
there's such a mass difference of the person you were and the person you are now. And I'm sure you can relate to this because I always tell people that it feels like another lifetime that I was a witness. And
Oh
like
yeah.
you were saying earlier, if somebody asks you, what do the Jehovah's Witnesses believe? You're like,
Like,
Google will be able to answer more than
they believe in paradise and something about you get to have like animals as pets. I don't know.
exactly. I wanted to ask you, are you still in construction?
No. Part of me is like, man, I should have kept that up because like how cool would it be like, yeah, Cleo the carpenter, like pull out my tool, like my hammer. I still have my hammer and my tape measure that I duct tape that I had like pink duct tape on so men wouldn't steal it because it's my tools because that happens at construction site. But no, I don't do that anymore. But I also think that I could I think that I could probably still build a house with help of like YouTube videos. Like I think I could figure that out. But no, I don't do that anymore.
I mean, that would be pretty epic if you did that. And so
Right?
2 years ago is when you saw your parents. When was the last time you saw your brother?
Man, probably I think it has to be around like 4 years ago because like he just doesn't. Also going back to your question, I of what I would say to my younger self, I would probably tell her like trust yourself. You are capable of doing whatever you put your mind to, and just like literally know that anything is possible. And I would also just be like forget everything that you've been taught and just know that like I think it always comes back down to just like trust what's in here, like trust what's in here, and don't worry about anybody else but you. So that's what I probably tell.
I love that, especially because we're told that the heart is so treacherous. It's like that's the last thing you should trust is your heart and your instinct and your intuition. It's like actually those are the things that you should trust. Don't be trusting these men that are coming up with rules out of their ass. Like, can we just not do that anymore?
Like some man in the sky told me to not trust the thing that is real in here.
Right,
No.
right. Some old men in the governing body. So 4 years ago, since you spoke to your brother, that's wild. Now it's been 2 years. You living in Seattle. What have you been up to in these 2 years?
Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. No. So a lot of hiking. I basically moved out here to like be closer to nature because I grew up pretty much a tomboy. Like I grew up with all boys playing football in the side yard, like going through the creek and ponds and all that stuff when I was younger. Climbing trees was like my favorite thing to do. So I've always like been a little hippie child. So I think the nature aspect of Seattle just drew me to out here. And I like literally every time I see the pine trees and like Mount Rainier and the mountains, I'm just like, it's so pretty. So I've been doing a lot of hiking, doing a lot of honestly, just like, I feel like moving out here has been such a pivotal experience or pivotal time for my healing process. And I had a moment last year. I was talking about, I was camping, I was smoking a little weed and just like talking about my childhood to somebody and about how when my parents built my like childhood home, I was like 7 years old and my mom let me design my own room and like all the crazy ideas you have as a 7-year-old. Like my mom was just like, yeah, let's do that. Like my room was probably, if I saw a picture of it now, I'd be like, what the fuck was she thinking letting me do that? But like just in that time that I was explaining like how my mom like let me do that, it like hit me really hard that I'm gonna cry about this again. I cried about back then, like realizing that my parents care so deeply for me and that they love me, and like they were good parents and they were doing the best they can, but it's like, how hard is that for parents to like not have communication with their child? And like that was like the first time that I felt their pain, and I think that was like a really big point in like my evolution of like healing, of just like it's not just about me. Like obviously like that was such a hard thing for me to go through, like losing my family, but like that has to be so hard on them too. Like, I mean, they're my parents. You see a baby grow up into a 19-year-old and all of a sudden poof, they're gone. Like that has to be so hard. So realizing that, I think kind of also helped me with not having like so much anger and resentment towards them. And like I always tell people, like it helps me deal with the fact that my parents don't talk to me, knowing that they think that they're doing the right thing. Like they think by not talking to me, they're helping me have an opportunity to come back to Jehovah and come back, and like that's what they want. So it's like my parents don't hate me, you know. My mom probably still cries about it all the time, and like they're so trapped in that brainwash and like control that they feel like they can't reach out to their daughter because they hold their relationship with God so much higher than their relationship with anything else. Like that's just, you know, like your relationship with Jehovah means everything. So that was like a really big breakthrough for me to like look at it from my mom's side of like how much pain she's going through. So I think that's also helped me be able to just kind of send them messages sometimes, because I went through a lot of feeling of like, fuck them, I don't want them in my life. Like I've made it this far without them. Why would I even want them in my life? Like they probably wouldn't be able to appreciate me for who I am even. So like, what's the point? But like now I've kind of like wanted to almost send them pictures sometimes of like, hey, I'm doing great. Like I love my life. This is where I'm at now. Like just kind of like give them little things, because it's like I can reach out to them all I want, you know, but they can't, they're not allowed to reach out to me. So I think that's kind of like that moment like kind of changed the dynamic for me a little bit. And the only time I really hear from my parents, my grandpa passed away last year, and like I got a text from my dad saying, you know, that he passed away, and I think they invited me to the memorial. They sent me a text for that. And then randomly, this was a couple months ago, I got a text from my dad, and like anytime a little thing shows up on my phone, I'm just like, okay, who died? What happened? Like, what's going on? And I read this text, and it was just like, it was so strange, because like, it was just a normal text that your dad would send you, but it was like, me and your mom are thinking about you, like, hope you're doing okay. We just want to let you know that we love you. And I was just like, what? Like, this is weird. And I think it took me a little bit to even respond, because it brought up a couple different emotions of like, again, like every time they text me, I'm like, who died? You know? And it's weird to get a text from my parents for them just to check in on me and see if I'm doing okay. But that also made me think, like, are they starting to kind of wake up a little bit? Like, is this the start of them being like, we can totally just text our daughter and see if she's okay. Like, so I forget honestly what I think I told them, like, yeah, I'm living in Seattle. I love it here. I'm doing great. And I think that was pretty much the conversation. But even on my birthday, which was back in May, I like wrote out this like whole paragraph, and I was going to send them a couple pictures of myself and just like give them an update, but I don't think I ever sent it. But I think maybe sometime soon I'll probably like maybe write them an email or send them a text and just like actually send them pictures. And like, who knows? I always said like I wouldn't want them in my life, but like, you know, who am I to say that? Like things change. So, you know, in 5 years they could be like out of the religion too, and you know, so yeah, it's weird.
I think like just like with the whole angry stage that we talked about earlier that the Jehovah's Witnesses go to, like you definitely don't want your parents in your life. They shunned you, they treated you like a certain way. You definitely don't want them. And then when you work on yourself and you heal yourself from this religious trauma, you're like, you know what? If they come back into my life, my arms are wide open for them. Because I, like you said, I know that they want to, but they're so brainwashed in the religion that they can't see straight. So if those blinders come off and all of a sudden, oh shit, I've been in a cult. Oh my God, I haven't spoken to my daughter in years. Of course I want to speak to her. I hope she wants to speak to me too. And then if you're like, fuck you, I don't want to speak to you. You're disown me. But if you're like yourself and me, like I feel like we're in a good place. And if our parents decide to, if my mom, if your parents decide to one day say, hey, I would love to have a phone call with you. I would love to come and visit you in Seattle. You're like, of course. Let's chat. We can chat with whatever it is that you want to speak about. So I think that it's like healing. The healing is the process as well. So, and I know that your parents would, yeah. I mean, when was it that they had sent you that message?
I don't remember exactly when. It was a couple of months ago. But
okay, that's great. You never know. I mean, the fact that they even sent that message is huge. They know. And as far as I know, there's like even more and more information how you shouldn't be associating and talking to your disfellowship kids or relatives. So the fact that they did that, that's really, really big during this crazy time.
And I think it's becoming maybe more evident to them that like I'm not coming back. So it's like if they do want to have a relationship with me, it's like, you know, and I am a big believer in like timing of everything and trusting the divine timing of life. And like I think things don't happen until like you're ready to heal them or deal with them. And it's like if I am getting to a point like where I feel like I'm peeling back different layers of like my trauma and healing different parts of that. And just thinking like I just had a moment where you're just talking about this right now, like what a healing experience it would be if I could have just like a conversation with my parents. Like I'm sure it would be very heavy emotional. Like I think everybody would be crying, but like what a experience that would be to just sit down with them and be like talk about everything freely. And I mean, yeah, you never know. Like I think like the way that I handle things could maybe help them like kind of wake up, if like I keep showing love, it's like you're taught to show unconditional love in the organization, but like I did not feel unconditional love until I left the organization, like truly. So it's like if I keep showing up the best that I can, like I could be the catalyst for them leaving.
Yeah, I am right there with you. And both of us are not like crazy apostates where we're picketing at the convention like you are horrible people. Like some people are meant to die Jehovah's Witnesses. So I have deep respect for people in general. Whatever makes you happy is my motto. So some people are just meant to be Jehovah's Witnesses for the rest of their life. I'm not here to wake people up. I'm just here doing my own thing and sharing people's stories. So I'm not here talking bad about the witnesses or saying they did this or did that. It's like, that's why if my mom decides one day to come back, if your parents decide, we're not saying anything bad about the religion, although it could be identified as an apostate just because you are not a witness anymore. So that's a whole nother story. So thank you so much for sharing your amazing story with us, Cleo. Is there anything you'd like to add that you feel like we haven't shared about your story?
I mean, I think I could like talk for hours about this, but I don't know. Sometimes I just think about like, if anybody like finds this, that's like still a witness or like somebody who knew me, like what you're saying, like there is no hate or resentment towards like the organization or like people from my past. And, it's like, yeah, I have a lot of, like trauma from that situation, but like, I mean, I just like want to know, I just want people to know if they find this, like, I still love you and care for you. And it's like, life's fucking crazy and you never know what's going to happen. And don't be afraid to question things and listen to your gut.
Please question everything, like
Question
literally everything.
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 I question everything still all the time.
No, be curious about everything, question everything, because nothing is black and white. Everything can be whatever you want it to be. And just things, even things that are quote unquote bad, like who said that they're bad? And then we put all these emotions to attach to something that's bad, and then we start getting afraid of it. It's like, no, it's we have it. Our mind is so fucking powerful, so powerful. So please, like you said, question, and become curious. Like we weren't taught that either. So thank you so much, Cleo. And I love this interview. Thank you again for allowing yourself to share your story as much as you possibly did in this beautiful interview. I'm going to hit stop button and thank you again. Thank you for watching.